partnerships with universities for a richer experience for the modern student. It's my pleasure to introduce David Linke, Managing Director of EduGrowth, and David Bowser, CEO and founder of Curio.
Thanks very much, Danny. It's a real pleasure to be able to host this. My name's David Linke. I'm the Managing Director of EduGrowth. We're Australia's EdTech and Innovation Industry Hub. And it's a real pleasure to connect with David Bowser again. So we've got the David and David show this morning and this afternoon. So I'll do a formal introduction because it's very impressive, David. So David has more than 20 years of experience in the higher education as both an academic and as a leading strategy consultant retained by vice chancellors and their executive teams to advise on their most complex strategic issues. But he left all that behind in 2016 to create the Curio Group, a collective of advisors, educators and product developers focused on working directly with education institutions to make a difference. Welcome, David.
Thank you, David. Good to be here. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that. And I know that we've got an incredibly interesting conversation coming up ahead. So why don't we start by thinking very broadly about, we hear about partnership with universities a lot. And especially the last few years, it seems like everywhere we go, we're talking about partnerships. So what do we actually really mean when we think about partnership with universities?
Thanks, David. I think it's an overused term in client services more broadly, to be honest, and everyone wants to be a partner. Maybe it's a bit like everyone seeks a partner, but no one actually gets exactly the one that they particularly want.
Maybe you get the partner you deserve, though.
You do indeed, David. So the way that we think about partnerships in terms of working with universities is different to what I would refer to as management. So often management is about handing something over, outsourcing, for example, giving it over for someone else to do something for you, or manage internally, such as an online program manager. Partnerships are a little bit different. In partnerships, it's more of a two-way street. It's that the university or the client partner is looking for particular skills or capabilities or services that they may not necessarily have inside the organisation and are hoping to partner with another provider to be able to do it. And we look at it and think about it in sort of the terms of around, I think it's like 6 aspects of partnership that universities are often looking to go outside for. So there's the classic business advisory sort of services like management consulting, strategy consulting, etc. But then increasingly it's market-led product design, market research, lead generation marketing, which all sort of fit in that market-led approach as another partnership opportunity. There's the design and development services, particularly in online and blended learning, so providing subject matter expertise, learning design, instructional design services, curating an experience for a learner. There's advisory services on the learner experience. So what does it look like? How do we do it? What's the best way of doing it? And that's often around micro-credentials and social learning and digital adoption tools. Then there's delivery services, so the teaching. How do you teach? How do you accredit programs? Creating that community practice. And then the final, and some would say probably the most important one, around assessment management. And with those 6 different areas, I think there's different ways that universities in particular, but also schools and vocational colleges and professional bodies can partner with others to either what they classically say, build, buy or ally. So build the capability, buy it in, or align yourself with a partner to be able to access their services. So that's how I sort of think about it.
I think it's a really good model. We'll come back to the build, borrow and buy, a build, buy or borrow model in a moment, because I think there's something really interesting for us to think about in that. But before we get there, let's think about, obviously universities and our commercial partners or commercial entities are entering partnership around higher education, both in Victoria, Australia, and actually around the world. And I'm really interested in what do you think the universities bringing or getting in that partnership, or what is their objective?
I think the objective can be a whole different bunch of ways for the university, and it very much depends on their strategy and the capability that they have internally. More often than not, in my experience. And so then when they're looking for a partner, particularly in online programs, they've got to think about, well, what parts of that particular capability set do they need to bring in, and where are they going to get them from? And apologies if you can hear my dog barking in the background. So where are you going to get those particular parts from, I think, David, is what becomes quite important. So they might be thinking strategically that the online experience is just something that they want to create as a new income or revenue source for the university, in which case probably going with an online program manager is probably a good option, because they'll work with you in a revenue split model. You don't have really any of the day-to-day management of the programs. You may have to provide subject matter expertise. You may have to deliver the programs. Increasingly, they don't. But otherwise, you can effectively outsource the whole thing and just take an income stream. You want to make sure, of course, that it covers your overheads for the university, but otherwise you can just take an income stream. Alternatively, you might say, well, actually, we want to partner for the long term because we want to create an asset that in the future we may wish to sell, like a joint venture of some sort. And in Australia, probably the most common model of that is one that doesn't exactly exist anymore, but is sort of similar, which was the Swinburne Online model that was done with OES and SEEK. So very much that joint venture type of experience. And then finally, there's the ones where they're really looking to develop their internal capability. They don't have it at the moment. They're willing to outsource it as long as they can actually develop the capability sets in-house. And that's probably the one that we're seeing more commonly these days.
And traditionally, we also had university-to-university partnerships as well, right? We had university, or even actually, and you mentioned it before, I think before as well, vocational providers partnering with universities too.
Correct. Yeah, again, that was quite a common model and quite a popular one as well, particularly in being able to cover the whole gamut from post-secondary in terms of education. And increasingly, I think you would. Not as much as it used to be. I think it's sort of split out largely now. In Australia, there are still what we refer to as dual sector providers, which are offering both the vocational and the higher education. But there's only, I think there's 4 in Victoria, Charles Darwin in the Northern Territory, and that's really about it in terms of the way that they think about it now. But increasingly, though, they're looking at other ways. So, for example, working with FutureLearn for micro-credentials and short courses, or for accredited programs on the Coursera platform, or with edX or Udacity. So there's lots of different ways that universities can set up partnerships. The main thing I always think when I'm advising universities on the partnerships that they're thinking about is to ensure that there's a strong alignment of values, so that you're effectively aligned in the same sort of way, and also on the rationale for doing it. And if the rationale and those values are aligned, then generally you'll have a successful partnership that will go for years as opposed to weeks or months, if you like.
I think it's also just really nice if we just spend a minute just giving a bit of an outline of the Victorian post-secondary market, just because the majority of our viewers and attendees and delegates are actually based in the UAE.
Yeah. So just what does the Victorian market look like?
Yeah.
Like post-secondary, they're in Victoria, and particularly the Victorian state, is they have, I think there's 12 what they would refer to as technical and further education institutions, which largely are the vocational programs, so 1 to 4, and increasingly associate degrees and diplomas. There's around about a group of those. In other states in Australia, they're all under one state banner. So New South Wales, they all exist under TAFE New South Wales. In Victoria, it's distributed largely geographically, to be honest, is the way that they tend to work. There are then 6 universities. Most of them are actually based in the CBD of Melbourne or in regional centres such as Geelong. And then we have Federation University, which is sort of our regional university, if you want to call it that. But that's really the way that it currently sits. There are then a whole bunch of private providers who aren't sort of state controlled or state influenced, if you want to call it that. Registered training organisations that work mostly in the vocational sector, and there's hundreds of them. And then in the tertiary space provider, there's only a handful of them. So maybe 3 or 4 that actually work in the sector, and they're private generally.
And,
so that's sort of
really
the way the market's made up.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a really interesting characteristic in Victoria as well. So we have 2 sort of globally recognised research institutions, which are really, really highly ranked globally. And then there's a great group of I'll use the term challenger universities. I don't know what the right way to do it, but there's a 4 really impressive challenger universities below that are doing really interesting stuff. So there's an interesting space there. And in fact, Victoria is the home of the online program management market in Australia, with KeyPath based here. We'll put Curio is somewhere in that group as well. We'll talk a lot more about Curio. We've obviously got Pearson based here, Future Learner here now, and Seeker based here too. So really, really impressive components there. Let's go back to the point you made before, build, buy, borrow. What does that look like in the university space? What does build, buy, borrow look like?
I think it's still a challenging way to be thinking for higher education institutions more broadly, because they're often talking about some things that they would consider to be core business in terms of delivery of teaching, accreditation of programs, assessment management, etc., as really being core to what they are and who they are. But being able to provide additional services to them means that they can actually start thinking outside of the box on this sort of stuff. Like they might say, you know what, look, we're not going to be fast responding, quick to get back to a sales lead like a potential student, etc. We don't have the capability or the capacity in-house to do that. We will put that out to another provider who can help us do that particular piece. Whereas they might then say instead on the design and development aspects of the learning experience that they might actually have the multimedia team and the development team inside, but the instructional or learning design elements of it, they might say, look, we're at capacity, we need some extra help. Can you help us do these particular courses? And that's where we tend to actually come into it. Around the program delivery and the teaching aspect of it, like I was saying, the challenge often for the university is the industrial instruments that they have to work in. And by that, I mean the contracts and the employment contracts that they have to work within. It's very hard to be asking people to be working outside of regular hours. And as we know with online learning, most of the learning actually happens outside of 9 to 5. So often it's upskillers and career changes and online experiences. They're working after they've been studying after they've already been working all day. So they're mostly online, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday nights, and they give away their Sunday afternoon as well. So consequently, the standard academic in a university isn't really willing to work those additional hours in order to be able to serve that particular student cohort. So they've got to find other ways of being able to deliver to those students and that experience. So I think that's where it starts to fit in. In the assessment space, I think outsourcing assessment has been something that's been in existence a long time. But what's really important is that the universities maintain and hold the moderation of the assessment so that they ensure that there's a consistency of the quality and also the accreditation of the program that's actually being...
Well, that's their thing they bring to the market,
that's
right? The accreditation and the quality. Yeah.
Yep, that's their
I just want to pivot
government-given right, David.
Sorry?
Their government-given right is accreditation.
Let's pivot our thinking just a little bit, but we'll keep with the partnership lens. So where does an innovation agenda, say within a large university that you are advising, we don't need to name any of them, fit within the university partnership model? Where does their innovation agenda sit?
It mostly will sit in the DVC academic education portfolio when it comes to learning and teaching. Most universities these days, particularly the ones that we've worked with, have a particular learning and teaching strategy or approach that they've got in train. 3 aspects of it that they tend to be looking at. How do they improve the quality of teaching and therefore the sort of qualifications and professional learning that's required for an academic to be able to teach in various different modalities? That's part 1. Part 2, they're looking often at how do they develop the courseware, because previously they would have just gone into a lecture, developed some slides, delivered the program, etc. Maybe there was some tutorial or lab-based experiences, but that would be it. In the online environment and the blended environment, students are now expecting that there is a full learning experience that has been curated for them to be able to run through the materials. So that's the second part that they're often thinking about. The third one they're really trying to work out at the moment is how do they do these micro-credentials and skills mapping exercises so that they're trying to stay at the cutting edge. And that's the part that's probably getting the most innovation focus at the moment. How do they offer these micro-credentials that are largely not accredited? Which ones do they offer? How do they get them going? And then how do they offer them to the market? And that's probably where a lot of the innovation spend in most universities is happening at the moment. And what's often easy for them is to be able to say, oh, there's a another organization out there who can potentially just take this and do it for us, that's great, but you want to make sure there's a university that you're continually learning yourselves from that experience, so that in 5 years' time, let's just say, you can do it yourself. And I think that's the important part, and that's often from a business advisory consulting perspective, you're always trying to think, how can I get my clients to the point where they don't need me? I think there's a tendency often in some of these partnerships that they're creating it so that they're always going to be sticky to you and attached to you. And really what we should be doing for the sector is trying to give back and get them skilled up.
The point you made before around the sort of micro-credentials and skills mapping sort of reminds me of a thing that we did yesterday on this stage. Actually, we were talking with someone from the Victorian government, Department of Education. They're talking about a new platform to sort of micro-badge, for want of a better term, because I know that they still haven't quite defined it yet. Human-centric skills as students move through these courses and not necessarily waiting for the final accreditation. So that gives us a sort of, again, a nice little segue. So we've been thinking about partnership, we've been thinking about innovation. Now let's start thinking about capability, because I think that's sort of a really interesting thing. And when we were having this conversation, prepping for this, you gave a great introduction to Curio. I'd love for you to give us that introduction as well, because it launches off onto the conversation I want to have.
Absolutely. So I'll take the opportunity to give a plug. Let's call it that, David. Curio does 4 things in learning. And our mantra is about learning for a changing world. We were around about 200 staff across Australia into Asia, and at the moment moving into up into Asia and into North Asia, into China and Hong Kong, etc. We have a very large presence now in the UK and into Europe, and interestingly now, and possibly for this audience in the UAE, we're being asked to actually build courses and content in Arabic and also sometimes in Persian. Which has been a really interesting experience. So basically, Curio has 4 things. One, we do the classic sort of business strategy advisory services in working with universities and learning providers in, at the moment, a lot of actual primary and secondary schools, so K-12 space, in working out how do they go online and how do they do it well, and what is the model that's going to work for them, what capabilities do they need to have in-house. Second, we do instructional or learning design and development. We sit behind a number of universities and their online programs in Australia in developing their online courses for them, but increasingly with professional bodies and with schools again as well. We advise quite a bit on this learning experience as part of that. Our largest part of our business is in what we refer to as program delivery services by our faculty. And our faculty are around about 100 people who close to work for full time for us in delivering online learning experiences for our partners and the universities that we work with. So that covers pretty much every discipline that we've been able to come across so far, across business and management, law, health, medical, psychology, etc., as well as increasingly engineering, maths and stats and sciences. And then finally, we do quite a bit in the assessment space around those. And basically the business model for Curio is the margin. So what we make out of doing that sort of a work, we reinvest back into largely software products. We give back to universities at a low price or actually for free. And those platforms include a sales front end for the learning management system of the university so they can go direct to market on micro-credentials. Or we have a job board platform and networking platform called Sessions, which has about 15,000 global academics on it at the moment, and it's growing every single day to really just connect university academics not only with each other, but also with job opportunities that are out there. And for universities, particularly in Australia at the moment, that's a completely free service for them to use.
But also a pretty needed service, I think, at the moment too, right?
It is, yeah. We're using it in the UK because our partners that we're working in the UK with, which includes Pearson, another OPM, we're trying to work with them in delivering a whole bunch of courses at the moment for them and for some of their university partners, but also for some of ours. And so we need to find the right talent and then develop the right talent. And that's what it's about, because we will coach people, we will offer them professional learning and professional development opportunities to really get there. So that's roughly the business model for Curio.
And the thing that I'm really interested in is where is the demand coming from? Is it the university strategy that's saying, hey, we need to fix this? Or is it a combination of you proposing idea to them? Like, which side of the equation is it coming from?
So the way that leads seem to come to us at the moment is largely word of mouth. We're not really out in the market spruiking our wares at present. We probably should be doing that, but we've got more than enough work at the present, so we haven't had to. But often, as we all know, particularly in the higher ed sector in Australia and also globally, that everyone sort of knows everyone else, and everyone's sort of connected, and they're all really happy to talk about great experiences that they have working with providers like us and the bad experiences that I'm sure they have as well. And so really quickly people work out what they can be doing. But a lot of our work actually comes through the strategic advisory services that we do in working with partners. So working with them to think through what their challenge is and what it is that they actually want to solve. Because a lot of them are really different and they all have very different problems depending on what they're looking at. If they're a big research intensive university, it's more about leveraging their brand to move into the online space. If they're a younger challenger university, as you describe it, they're probably thinking a little bit about, well, what's the other offerings that we can add to, generate further investment income for the university. So it really depends, I think.
Okay, let's return back to our original topic, right? So we've been thinking about partnerships, we've been thinking about innovation, we've been thinking about capability framework. So now let's go back and try and connect the dots. We've got a few minutes left, and that is, how is all of these things coming together to alter, and I'm going to lead you with improve the student experience?
I think there's a bunch of different ways. And I think the main part that we're starting to see how universities are improving the student experience itself is that they're actually starting to ask them what they want and what they don't want. They're running a lot more pulse surveys early in programs, so they really quickly understand what's working and what's not working. And they can also see that they where in particular in learning and in courses, they can see which resources they're looking at, which ones they're skipping over, etc. So I think what they're starting to learn, and it takes very much that sort of service design view of a learning experience, is what works and what doesn't work and being strongly data informed on it. So it means then that they can be continuously improving the actual experience for students. And by doing it that way, I think actually they're starting to learn, but their maturity of what you might say their data analytic and approach and their technology that they often have is still not great. So there's a little bit of a way to go there. And education, similar to health, as much as you would expect to be really sort of influenced and disrupted by technology, it really hasn't had a huge influence until, COVID became, the digital disruptor. And so I think there's still a way to go, certainly a lot further than my former clients in financial services who are miles ahead and who are saying, for example, at the moment, that really most banks and financial services institutions really are technology companies. They just have a couple of people who are in some storefronts. And that's some of the way that some of the thinking needs to change. But don't get me wrong, I still believe, and I really truly believe, because my background is as a neuroscientist, is that learning is a social experience for many of us and for most of us. Some of us can just read something and absorb it and then can do it. Vast majority of us learn from each other and from peers, and therefore you really want a human to be a key part of that experience. So I think keeping the human in to the online and blended is actually what's going to differentiate in the future.
So that leads me to my final question really for you is, in some of these partnerships, you've got people who have probably got concepts of customer service, customer experience. I'm not sure whether or not we've got academics thinking customer service and customer experience yet. Well, are we at that stage yet, or are we gone too far if I start talking about customer experience and customer service?
I think, David, it's a little bit like referring to courses as products. It's sort of in a similar mindset.
Which side of the side you're on, David.
And I think that there is increasingly academics, and it's a very broad church, of course, are being more aware of the student experience that they're trying to deliver. I think that the old school, if you want to refer to it as of, these are my courses, this is how I deliver it, I stand up, I deliver 3 50-minute lectures a week, and then I walk out the door, has long gone. And most academics know that that is long gone. If they're still trying to do that, they're probably doing it to an empty lecture theatre, but they have to do that because there's a camera recording them. Otherwise, I think the experience is increasingly being really impacted by the student feedback that comes in. And if academics aren't asking for it, the students that are coming in this generation are going to give it to you regardless. So you may as well
good
be
point.
open and hearing about the experience and openly asking for it to bring it in is a much better place to be than to be going, you know what, we don't need to know about that sort of stuff. We're just going to ignore it. I think the universities, like I was saying before, David, the providers who are really out there wanting to listen to what the student experience is and really deliver for them are the ones that are going to be leading in the future. And I think the academics are increasingly aware of that. And certainly those who are in teaching focus roles are strongly aware of it. I think it's maybe our colleagues who are more research focused experts who are probably not as aware of the experience.
But they got their place as well. So, David, that's a great point that we can sort of conclude our conversation on. I want to really thank you very much for your time and your insights and giving us an understanding of partnership models that you're seeing, and really the idea of trying to build new capability for institutions, but also deliver new experiences for students is really important. Thank you very much.
No worries, David. I look forward to hopefully very soon getting back actually to the UAE and to Dubai and seeing my friends and former colleagues over there as well. So hopefully it'll be soon.
Well, we look forward to seeing you in Dubai, David. Lovely. Thank you so much, David and David.
Thank you.
I'm sure the audience will agree that was very informative and insightful. And now I'd like to pass you over to Baresh Sattar, Director of Education Services, Middle East, Africa, and Turkey at the Victorian Government Trade and Investment Office, State Government of Victoria, to say a few words.